power because you're cheating, right? So it's really, really important that you're still pulling for this right shoulder. Now you notice when I do this, there's the left shoulder, and when I go for the head, still going to the same place. So the completion of that shot is the same, whether it's a leg or a head. The coolest thing about this is you can make that decision because it's so relaxed. You can make that decision right here. So you start your motion, and right about here, if they block the leg, you lift the hand, you pull for the shoulder. If they don't block the leg, go ahead and let it hit the leg, you pull for the shoulder. All you're really thinking about is how are they responding and getting that sword at the shoulder. So drive the foot, get it in motion, and then think about the shoulder you're going to, and watch, see where the target is, and hit it. Nice, relaxed shot. Okay. So at this point, we've covered the very root foundations of circular sword blows. We've got the fundamental core circle theory. We're going to step back into foundations and work on thrusting a little bit. Please keep in mind that in the advanced class, which we're going to cover today actually, we'll continue to develop circle theory. We're going to cover the following items. You can let your brain think about these before we get to them. We're going to talk about throwing flat plane circular shots at a variety of angles instead of just flat across. We're going to use a figure 8 pattern to tie circular blows into fluid combos. We're going to add more power to our blows based on upward and downward movement. We're going to understand the options and opportunities that arise when we hit our opponent's sword or shield, stopping our natural flow. We're going to refine our understanding of circles to include circles based on different joints of the body. We're just sort of talking generalized circles and how to transition between them. We're going to learn about a crucial difference between first blows and the rest of the blows. When the sword is just starting its motion from the still point, it's really quite different than all the other circular motions. We're going to get into detail on that. We're going to talk about the fundamental principles of defense and learn to locate our blocks along our offensive patterns. So, any questions on what we've covered so far before we move into thrusting for a while?
So when you're talking about circles, like you really touched on it with the rack, like the low rack and the high rack. You said move using your hand. Do you ever throw the same? I find myself when I'm throwing a circle and it's coming fast, using my hand to control the angle is harder than shifting. And you're throwing the same circle, shifting the angle of the anchor. You get the change.
Yeah, probably the reason I don't do that is I have a really bad lower back. But that makes sense. And you're using bigger muscles and a bigger mass to change it rather than the littler muscles of the shoulder and the hand. Yeah, and there's a lesson there. Different physiology, slightly different application, but the principle and the goal are the same, and the result is the same. It's just a different physiology. That's going to be true for getting your sword to move circularly smoothly too. Everybody's going to be a little different in the hand and the wrist and the elbows. So yeah, that's a perfectly valid way to do it, I think. I think also using, we'll talk about it a little later, but the compass step thing, using the steps to drive changes can work really well too. All right, so thrusting. We know that swords were clearly used for thrusting in the 14th century, as this technique features prominently in the 133 manual. In truth, the points on swords and references in older stories would indicate thrusting has been a part of swordsmanship since very early on. Perhaps even more so with thrusting than with cutting blows, it's important to have a stable and rehearsed guard position from which to launch the attack, something physically familiar. Similar to cutting, these are not positions to be posed in, but rather they are known positions through which the swordsman moves his or her sword on the way to launching a thrust. Having these rehearsed positions increases accuracy in thrusting and allows one to practice the transition from cutting blow to the thrust. Many of the techniques illustrated in the 133 manual include a thrust. Several ready-to-thrust positions are illustrated and several are implied. We will cover these and a few that I've added for completeness. The added ones are drawn from my own experience and are found in some of the later period manuals. Before we start thrusting, it should be noted that the sword arm should never lock fully straight at the end of the thrust. Always thrust to a slightly bent position, stopping under your own power. Do not rely on hitting your target to stop your thrust. This is done to protect your elbow. Unlike cutting, a thrusting action will not have so much momentum and leverage If I do this and try to stop my sword, all that momentum and leverage against my joints puts a lot of strain on me. But doing this to stop it, most people's bodies are completely up to that task without hurting themselves. But if you go all the way to your joint blocks, you're going to hurt that elbow. The temptation is to get lazy and rely on hitting something to stop that tip. And you keep your arm nice and relaxed. Problem is, if you miss that relaxation, you can take on into your joint blocks out and there's pain. So what I recommend is that you practice your thrusting to that slightly bent position, whether you hit something or not. So if there happens to be a head in the way, great, you pasted them in the face. If there doesn't happen to be a head in the way, you still thrust in the same position and return into your motion. It's the same thrust whether there's something in the way or not. And that trains you to defend an elbow. It also gives your body an understanding of what happens after the thrust. Because thrusts are awesome, but there is a tendency to be exposed defensively after the thrust. And part of the reason for that is being unclear on what your body does after the thrust if your opponent isn't there. Okay, so positions to thrust from. First position comes right out of the 133 manual. I call it right couch, and I'll explain why. That's from here. And in the 133 manual, you'll see them out there with the buckler held out here near the tip. The application there is you're denying your opponent the ability to knock the tip of your sword out of line with their sword and control your sword by having your buckler there to actually defend the tip of your sword. What I really like about right couched is you actually raise the base of your body, which gives you control over this heavy tip that's hanging out there and leverage against you. Some refinements on right couch. The reason I'm calling it right couch is it's like couching a lance. The palm is up, the weight of the weapon is resting on the palm, like it's tucked under your arm, and it's just resting right there, except for you're holding the grip of the sword. With a Pullian sword, the Pullian actually forms a T against the body, which gives you even more stability, which is awesome. Something else interesting about this is if you're doing it right, it puts your elbow, your hand, and the tip of your sword all in one line. There's a straight line all the way from the elbow to the tip of the sword. If you've got a key like this, your accuracy will be good. If it's all in line, your accuracy will be very good. An interesting thing about this, modern fencing has evolved out of this position. Their weapons are a lot lighter, but the alignment remains the same. Line from tip to elbow, modern fencing comes out of here, same alignment from elbow to tip. It gives you a lot of natural control on the tip of that weapon. When they have your weapon, this is a little cumbersome and unwieldy, and it's prone to getting deflected and its mass working against you. So retrade it back to the body, keep that same alignment. You'll have the same accuracy with your hits, and you'll be able to protect the tip of your weapon. Right couch is one of the few ones that you can't pose in because you've got this ability to cover the tip of your weapon. You've got a lot of control on it, so you can threaten someone in that position if you want. So far, it sounds awesome. Like it's the most awesome thrusting position ever. And I do like it, but there is one big problem. The problem is that your opponent's shield is right there on the side that you're threatening with your thrust. You don't have a lot of target available to you where you can thrust easily from that position. And that's a major problem with it. So that's why even in the 133 manual, this isn't referred to as the preferred thrust, even though it's noted as being a very good one. So let's talk about other positions. Left couched is similar, except for it's over here on this side. And you can see how you're not going to stand around and pose in this one, but it's a position that you might move into very briefly. Like if I hit my opponent, I can retreat my sword here and make a thrust from that position.